Hey folks, welcome back to Corax and Coffee Cast. This is Season 2, Episode 7, where we're going to be talking about a number of team-based games. And as we do that, as always, we are doing this through the lens of bringing new people into the hobby of tabletop gaming.
We're also doing it with an eye towards pushing back hard against that stereotype that board gamers and nerds are asocial beings.
Thank you so much, as always, to our behind-the-scenes people, our producer, Keegan King, our game consultant, Ms. Shaw, as well as everyone else who does things without mention on a regular basis. We could not do any of this without you. We love you so much.
Absolutely. So today, we're going to discuss specifically what we mean when we say a team game, because this is something that's not always clear. And then we're going to talk about some of the benefits of playing team games. We're going to talk about how a lot of people seem to think that team games are new in the scene of board games. They're really not. They go back at least 20 years.
Some of the team games that we enjoy, we're going to talk about in depth. We're going to discuss some of the reasons why there are not more team games and why they're actually difficult in some ways to get to the table. And we're also going to make a plug towards the end of this episode for more team games being produced. Actually, I think this probably whole episode is a plug for the production of more team games.
And then towards the end of the episode, Pete is going to talk about an entirely different game.
That's right, I am. At the end, I'm going to talk about a game that I love. I've mentioned before. We've done a full print review of that you can find at coraxandcoffee.com. And it might be considered a team game. More on that later.
Yeah, probably not. But by the time we figure that out, you'll have already gotten to talk about it. So there.
Maybe, but probably not. We'll figure that out later. And after that, we're going to say goodbye for now. So
team games are an area of the tabletop community that is certainly pretty underdeveloped, both in the number of games that are available, as well as the quality and range of depths of the games that do exist.
Let's be very clear in our meaning when we say team games. We're not talking about semi-cooperative games where there's a chance to betray your teammates or any other players. We're not talking about one versus all games, which are most typically dungeon crawlers, where it's a group of players against one other player. And we're not talking about fully cooperative games where it's all players against some automa opponent of one type or another. When we say team game, we're talking about at least two human players working together on the same team to win together or lose together against at least two other human players on an opposing team. And there are some games where a team can be made up of three or more players. There are games where there are more than two teams. There could be four teams potentially or more.
Sure. But it has to have that symmetrical combat between two teams of players.
I'm not sure it has to be entirely symmetrical, because I think if you have a team of 2 and 3, that's fine. Or a team of 2 and 4, that's okay. But, it's kind of a weird subdivision. As soon as you have 2 versus 1 or 3 versus 1, then it's a 1v-all of a type.
Right.
And I suppose you could still play a team game or some team games in that fashion. So we're kind of getting really down in the weeds here. But I'm talking about generalities.
Sure. So team games can be a huge benefit because when you bring a newcomer to the tabletop, they might already be feeling fairly overwhelmed. This is a new setting, it's a new activity, and you've perhaps got a whole new group of people that they got to get used to and figure out where they fit in.
And a new game, potentially. Mm-hmm. And it can be too much to ask them to do all of these things. New group, new game, maybe new hobby. It's too much to ask one person to hold all of that and also basically advocate for themselves on their own in a all versus all game.
Exactly. And it can be even worse if you're talking about a semi-cooperative game, because then it's not really clear if you are in it for yourself or not. That's part of the fun, right? Is figuring out who's on your team at this moment. But that's a lot to get your head around when you're also just trying to figure out what the rules are and whether you like these people at the table.
And, for newcomers to the hobby, if you bring them to board game night and introduce them to a game, but you say, hey, here are your teammates, they have your back, it could potentially be much less intimidating and less anxiety-provoking for them to engage in the game.
Absolutely.
Yes, team games kind of are rife with quarterbacking, where, the experienced player tells other people on their team exactly what to do, and then it's really just one player with human appendages, and those are some of the punches you have to take with some team games. But quarterbacking is both game and player dependent.
Yeah, that's something that experienced gamers have to decide they're not going to do and fight the urge to engage in. We also want to point out that many people are no strangers to team games. They're kind of rare at the tabletop these days in terms of published games, but most everybody grew up playing Pictionary, which is an entirely team-based game.
I mean, there's Pictionary. Had some good times playing Pictionary and some really sour times playing Pictionary, let's be honest.
Oh, sure.
But there's also charades, right? Pictionary and charades are very common, almost ubiquitous kind of family party games from childhood.
Right.
And yes, you can purchase published versions of charades and Pictionary if you'd like. You can get, general editions or thematically focused published editions, but it's almost entirely unnecessary.
It's almost like buying a game of tag.
Right. Bang, a game of tag is saying this is going to be a base and this is going to be a base and here are the boundaries,
And we probably could have figured all this out ourselves,
right.
But,
So there are some trivia games that are team-based as well.
And, of course, most sports are team-based, so this is a familiar structure.
Yeah, even cross-country is team-based. Rick and I were on a cross-country team 20 years ago together.
We were.
We were, yeah. It's
a
very team-based.
Very solitary team experience, but yeah, absolutely. We were all scored together and lived or died as a team.
We were kind of a team family, and with that transition, let's talk about family team games, or at least one.
Sure. What are you thinking?
Let's talk about Codenames. First came out in 2015 by Czech Games Edition, which is often seen on board game boxes as just CGE. So basically, there are two teams in Codenames, and each team has a leader, and the leader's goal is to lead their team to final victory. And you have a grid of cards that are 5x5, so you have 25 cards, and each card has a color, which is red or blue. And at the beginning of the game, you lay out all these cards so you don't see which color they are, and each card has a corresponding position representing different colors. It's kind of be hard to visualize this without a visual, but it's a podcast, so what can you do? But only the team leader can see the color of the card, and the team leader should prompt, according to certain words, to let their team members find out if the cards are certain corresponding colors. So it's this kind of limited communication game, in a way.
So one of the good things about Codenames is Pete was just saying how it's difficult to explain in a auditory medium. But once you have it in your hands, it's very quick and fun to get people around the table. And it's an interesting way to get people warmed up to team dynamics. It is a fairly simple game dynamic, which can be frustrating for some people. Not everybody likes clue-giving games and not being able to say the thing that you want to say. That being said, the major con for me is not the game itself, but that it prompted the release of so many editions. And when you have so many editions of the same game, it can get new players to gaming stuck and make it difficult for them to move on to a actually new game.
So, Rick, when you're just talking about multiple editions of Codenames, I was just inundated in my mind with all of these games, especially gateway games and family games that have so many editions, so many iterations. And I'm thinking about some of the games that we're talking about today that are plagued with the same problem. I think would be worthwhile to talk about the pros and cons of that a little bit as well. This might be a good opportunity to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Pete and I recently went to a local gaming store, and there was just a whole shelf or two full of the same game, which seems like a bit of a wasted opportunity. You had this one game and it had 15 different flavors of it.
We've not been naive to this issue, this event. We've known for a long time this has been a thing, but because of the pandemic, it's been the first time in a while we've been in a brick and mortar game store, and we were smacked in the face with it. So many iterations of certain games taking up so much shelf space, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is still a thing. So about 4 years ago was the last time I played Codenames, and I was actually hanging out with some cousins and uncles and aunts over the winter holidays. And one of my cousins busted out Codenames, and I said, hey, I'll play Codenames, why not? And I had fun with my cousins that I had not seen for a while, for years actually, because we hadn't really hung out since we were all kids. Mm-hmm. But I remembered, I had these childhood memories of playing games with these cousins like Dutch Blitz. And so all of that came back, and I really enjoyed playing Codenames with them, which is really about the people I was playing with, not the game itself.
Yeah, which is a great thing. Board games are a lot about bringing people together. The unfortunate thing is that doesn't help anyone decide if they want to play Codenames with their people.
There are a number of iterations of Codenames. So there's Codenames, which came out in 2015, and then Codenames Pictures came out in 2016, and then Codenames Deep Undercover came out in 2016, I want to say, and then Codenames Duet in 17, and then Codenames Disney Family Edition in 17, and then Codenames Marvel in 17, and then Codenames Harry Potter in 18. It's just... Look, if I published a game that turned out to be a gold mine, I would do the same thing, right? I would want to cash in on the thing and make as many iterations and editions as possible. But it's also not cool. I mean, we have the same issue with Ticket to Ride times 20. It's a cash cow. The problem is that it clogs up retailer shelves because they do sell, and so retailers stock all of them. That takes up the shelving and confuses people about what other games are great or available. What is the next step if they want to continue into the hobby? You know, they move laterally rather than vertically.
Right. And you also got, they're taking up shelf space because they're selling.
Right.
So they sell. So they take more shelf space because they're selling. And meanwhile, you've got new gaming developers trying to get into the space to get their game on a shelf somewhere, anywhere, please. And there's this question of, why would I put your game there when I can put the latest edition of Ticket to Ride and be sure that it's going to sell?
Exactly. And this is not a unique problem to the board game community, and we certainly don't want to soapbox too much here, but I mean, I am sympathetic to the problem here, especially, one, because board games, right, near and dear to my heart, but also board games are very greedy when it comes to physical space, right? They're not small things, and they take up a lot of space in our homes, and they take up a lot of space on retailer shelves, and they're competing for that space. And so when you have all these editions of Ticket to Ride, there are a lot of games that just don't make the cut.
And it's tricky because I want people who haven't played a lot of games to try Codenames. And if we can lure some people in from the My Little Pony fandom via Codenames, Friendship is Magic, that's great. That's fantastic. But I'd much rather have people move on to try other games than buy what's essentially the same game a dozen times or more. Unless that's what you're into.
Moving away from Codenames, but staying in team games, I'm going to move to the entire opposite end of the spectrum. I want to talk about the campaign for North Africa.
Yeah, okay, that's no longer simple.
No longer simple. And I was debating whether or not to talk about this game on the podcast, because what's the point really of talking about a game that's no longer available for people to purchase? And Campaign from North Africa, or The Campaign from North Africa, as it's actually titled, hasn't been published, I think, since 1979. But I've heard rumblings and grumblings that a new edition might come out. So
Sure.
it's still rumor, but it's substantiated rumor, so we will see. It's, again, COVID, uncertain times, who knows? Projects
Sure.
get canceled all the time.
And it wouldn't super surprise me because, of course, the campaign for North Africa has been popularized and immortalized in season 11 of The Big Bang Theory.
It has. So I want to talk about it as kind of both an extreme outlier of what team games can be and as an outlier anchor point, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So the true full name of this game is The Campaign for North Africa, The Desert War, 1940 to 1943. So designed by Richard H. Berg, not to be confused with Richard Borg, B-O-R-G. This is B-E-R-G. Richard Borg is the famous designer behind the Commands and Colors series of games, but The Campaign for North Africa is Richard Berg. And if you think about The Campaign for North Africa, it's really the ultimate team game.
Yeah, it simulates the entire North African campaign of the Second World War. This has been called the longest board game ever produced, with estimates that a full game would take 1,500 hours to complete. Only slightly faster than taking over Northern Africa.
I mean, if you don't have a full-time job, like, why not? Go for it, man. I mean, it's nominally a 2-player game. The rules recommend 10 players, divided up into 2 teams of 5 people on each team, composed of a commander-in-chief, a logistics commander, a rear area commander, an air commander, and a frontline commander. The board game map alone is about 9.5 feet long. The complete campaign takes 100 turns, each turn representing 1 week of game time.
This game was so massive that playtesting was not completed before the game was published by SPI in 1979, retailing for $44.
I think on eBay now you can get them for 600 or 700 if you're lucky.
What a deal.
What a deal, right? I have read speculations, though, that the point of this was not to play it, but just to see if it could be designed, right? You know, some games are more fun to design than to play.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a game about logistics of war more than combat or anything else. Actually, I was thumbing through an old kind of pop history book of mine from back in high school. I was probably reading this book when we were running cross country together.
Mm-hmm. So that's why you were so slow.
Wow. I always beat you. Yeah, fighting words.
Hurtful, but the opportunity was there.
It was there. Oh, wow. I mean, we keep referencing high school. Our viewers, our listeners are going to think, wow, they're having a what does it all mean moment. Let's move on. Let's not go there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this is a book called Dirty Little Secrets, Military Information That You're Not Supposed to Know by James F. Dunnigan and Albert Nofi, who I think are, civilian theorotactician contractors or consultants with the military. Like this is, But they said of logistics and war, quote, "War costs money, and most of that money is for logistics, the art and science of supplying troops with fuel, ammunition, food, medical supplies, and thousands of other items. In the broadest sense, logistics includes the development and procurement of equipment, the care and feeding of the troops, and all of the housekeeping details necessary to maintain a military force in fighting trim. Though frequently slighted by commanders, historians, and journalists alike, not to mention the general public, it is arguably the most important aspect of the art of war. When logistics are ignored, the military operations suffer, not to mention the troops. It may not be a sexy subject, but it is a vital one," unquote. So, if you want to play 1,500 hours of a game about that, then you'll know what the campaign for North Africa is all about.
Yeah. Some of the most vital developments in war have been boring like this. Consider the advent of the radio, which meant suddenly you didn't have to send a guy on a horse to go catch your army when it was going the wrong way. It was a huge change.
I mean, it'd kind of be cool to go back to the era of drums and flutes. I mean, I don't think back in the day people could be conscientious objectors of the draft. I think if you would just get conscripted and hung or shot if you deserted. I don't know.
There's actually a long tradition of soldiers basically not participating in war, not firing their weapons at all. They found muskets that have been reloaded 6 or 7 times. Sometimes they would deliberately fire over the enemy, not going for killing blows. It's fascinating stuff that you'll learn in military mental health.
This is a family show, so we're going to get back to gaming. But actually, the same pop history book I was just mentioning, I think they also said that during the Second World War, the Western powers sent the Soviets like almost 350,000 radios for their tanks and aircraft because they weren't equipped because, the Russians didn't have what might be known as an electronics industry.
Yeah.
So games.
Games. Yeah, I mean, I would love to get a copy of the campaign for North Africa. Not so much to play ever, because I don't think I could get 10 people together, but just be great to mount on the wall.
Yeah, like a stag head.
Yeah.
Because mounting animals is terrible. What are the games we got, Rick?
Oh, we've got 878 Vikings, Invasions of England.
Oh, yes.
The base game was released in 2017, designed by Bo Beckett, Dave Kimmel, and Jeff Stahl. Published by Academy Games.
Oh, this is an Academy Games game, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love Academy Games. I think they're a great company in terms of the products that they produce. I don't know anything else about their corporate policy or whatever. Hopefully it's good. In any and all of their games, they impart historical learning that can be used by gaming enthusiasts or used in schools or museums or university or even by military personnel to understand the historical context that their games are representing. All of Academy Games' game components include write-ups and maps that describe what was going on historically during the period of time that the game is depicting or representing.
Yeah.
They describe how those things progressed and the historical repercussions. I mean, honestly, I think this should kind of be the charge of most board games. Not all games have historical underpinnings, but I think it would behoove us all if more board games took a slightly more overt, not just covert approach towards education and contextual learning.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many things that I only know and remember because they were in a game somewhere. It's such a powerful tool for learning. And yeah, I love the idea of showing where this game sort of fits into the fabric of history. Maybe that can be a topic of a whole other podcast episode.
Maybe that's a season 4 thing. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure that all of Academy Games' games are winners, but I love so many of their games, and I love their mission and how they go about it.
There are a couple other Academy games that I happen to adore, which are specifically 1775, which is one of the 3 games in their 3-game Birth of America series, as well as Freedom, which is all about helping slaves escape from the South to Canada during the Underground Railroad. I do feel a little bit weird, however, as a white male manipulating game components that are supposed to represent slaves during the 1800s. That's odd to me, but again, we can discuss that another time. I'm also quite excited about Stellaris, which is going to be a 4X empire building board game, which are my people, based on the PC game that's supposed to be released, I want to say Q4 of 2022, I think. I don't know, by Academy Games. Anyway, 878 Vikings.
It's an area control board game in which 2 to 4 players play as the invading Vikings or the English nobles who are trying to withstand that invasion. You obviously need 4 players for it to become a true team game. The Viking players control the Norseman Viking freemen and the berserkers, while the English control the King's housecarls and the landholding Thane noblemen. The English start the game controlling all of England, but then the Viking players invade from the sea to strike deep into English territory. And players decide when to call the game by calling for the Treaty of Wedmore. At that point, the team controlling the most cities wins that game.
One of the great things about 878 Vikings, other than just bringing this historical event and period of time to the forefront for gamers, because this is just not taught in U.S. history textbooks. But what's really cool about this game is that while teammates get to collaborate, but each teammate has an individual hand of cards that their teammate cannot see. So you don't have perfect information even amongst your own team.
And you gotta love that feeling of trusting your mates to save you while not knowing how well equipped they are to do so. It's like, okay, so you got my back, right? And charge into enemy territory and like, I got your back, but I got nothing.
True to life.
It is. Yeah. Allies aren't going to know everything about their own allies. And it's not always beneficial to tell your allies everything, even if it were possible to do so. And it's really not. So I think that's just a great part of this particular game. Now, this also brings up one of the issues with the game. Because of this hidden information element, it isn't the best game to start new players out on.
No, it is not.
Yeah, their teammate is not going to be able to support them as much as they can in some other games, even in some other team war games. This isn't necessarily a con for the game, but it is something to know before you start.
I think when I first played my first couple games of 878 Vikings with a couple of friends in a game store in the before times, pre-COVID, the people who introduced me to the game said, "Oh, Steele, this is fantastic. You're going to really enjoy this." And I did. But then they said, "Don't bother with the expansions," which made me immediately think, I got to get a hold of these expansions and figure out why I should get a hold of them. And I'm really glad that I did, because there are a number of kind of mini expansions that you can plug and play into the game in kind of any combination you want. And yes, if you are out for a Sunday drive and you want to like look at the foliage and kind of admire stuff, then if that's the type of game you're going for, then the expansions in 878 Vikings are worth it. Because if you're trying to get from point A to point B very quickly in a tight war game, that's great. Mm-hmm. But the expansions for 878 Vikings include War for Land and Gods, and Kings, and epic battle events, and Viking ships, and relics and holy sites, and legendary leaders, and kingdoms. And these are not only kind of cool mechanical plugins that you can do for 878 Vikings, but because it's an Academy Games game, each one of these micro expansions that you can plug and play in almost any combination
has even more lore.
And not just lore, but historical reveals about what was actually going on at the time. And that is something that you just can sink your teeth in, and you can, with your gaming group, be like, hey, let's try 878 Vikings with this, or with that, or with these 3 things, or these 2 things, and this other thing, but not the thing we played with last time.
Sure. Fiddle with the dials a little bit.
Fiddle with the dials and see if that is the right experience for your group, and learn a little bit more, and then go to Wikipedia or maybe a more reputable source and be like, oh, wow, I actually learned something else about this period of time and this conflict that I didn't know, would not have even thought to know existed had I not played with this aspect of this game.
Often when the stakes of a game make historical knowledge important, you might be better off holding on to it. But
That's right. All right, what are we talking about next?
so let's talk about Axis and Allies.
Oh, wow. That takes me back 30 plus years and strips away all of my defense mechanisms. Okay, let's talk about it.
So the base game was released in 1981. It was designed by Larry Harris Jr. It was published by Milton Bradley. Quick overview, it's a war game. It's dudes on a map. World War II on a grand scale, a full global view of it. You can have up to 5 players playing on 2 different teams. You have the Axis, which has Germany and Japan, and you have the Allies, which have the USA, the United Kingdom, and the USSR.
Okay, so Rick, we're talking about Axis and Allies, and you mentioned these 5 powers. But just like Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition, Axis and Allies was my bread and butter of the 1990s. And the reality is there are tons of editions of Axis and Allies.
There sure are.
There's Axis and Allies, there's Axis and Allies Europe, Axis and Allies Pacific, Revised, D-Day, Battle of the Bulge, Guadalcanal, Anniversary editions galore, Global editions, Pacific editions, Europe editions that go together as well as are played separately. There's 2nd edition and Axis and Allies 1941, which is distinct because Axis and Allies by default starts in 1942. There's Axis and Allies World War I, which should really be called Axis and Allies The Great War, but that's a whole nother thing.
Right.
And I shoot you not, because I can't say the other thing, there is Axis and Allies and Zombies that came out in 2018, and I own it. And it is less than great, but I would absolutely play it again. I would absolutely play it again if somebody asked me to.
Gotcha. So yeah, it's a really fun game. It's got some flexibility in terms of player count and control of these various powers. Each of these world powers are distinct and they have different strengths and weaknesses and they focus on different things, but with similar enough rules in most editions that you can have the same player play multiple powers in the same game and not get lost.
I mean, some cons of the game is at its core, it's a dice chucking game. Because all Axis and Allies iterations are adaptations of a 1980s game, it is not really streamlined compared to modern war games. However, and I know I'm biased here because this is a game I grew up with, if anybody ever said, hey, Pete, let's do some Axis and Allies, I would ask what edition, but if it were one of the better editions, I would say, yeah, I'm down.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to think of its clunkiness as being part of the charm. Your mileage may vary if you didn't grow up with it, though.
What's great about it is that it's a flexible team game in that some of the standard editions or revisions of the standard edition have those 5 powers being Japan, Germany, the Soviet Union, the United States, and Great Britain, as you said. There are other editions that include Italy and China and Indonesia as independent forces, and that can be great too. But it's flexible in that you have to have all powers in the game, but multiple players, one player can play multiple powers. So in a 5-power edition, if you only have 4 players, that's okay. While each power is distinct, the rules for each power are not that different, so one player can play multiple powers and not get confused. So there's actually a lot of flexibility there.
And that's important because a lot of team games force you to have a specific number of players, and that gets really difficult. It's very difficult to get 4 or 5 people together. It's way more difficult to get exactly 4 people together.
Right, yeah. I mean, I played this game so many times. I played with my cousin Chris and my friends in college and my friend Will growing up. I actually always loved playing the Soviet Union, not because it was a fun power to play. It was actually quite a boring power to play. But I knew if I played the Soviet Union, nobody else could play it and screw it up because it was actually very difficult to play well. And I nailed it. So I was like, oh, I'll be the Soviet Union, which is like really an unpopular power to take. And people would stare at me and go, really? You'll play the Soviets? I'm like, absolutely. And I always got invited to Axis and Allies games because everybody knew, oh, Pete will play the Soviets and be cool with it. I'm like, heck yeah, I will. Nobody else knows how to do it properly.
That's handy. It's like running a healer.
Yeah, exactly. All right, what else we got?
I'm thinking we should discuss War Room as an alternative to Axis and Allies.
Ooh.
A little bit different.
So aside from codenames, are we just going to talk about war games that are team games? Is that the path we're going down here?
No, I think we've got something else.
Okay, let's do it. War Room. So War Room, I think, was released in 2019. This is another Larry Harris game. The art was by Thomas Gale of Nightingale Games. And if Axis and Allies is Larry Harris's classic, War Room might be considered his magnum opus, or I'm going to take that back. It would have been considered his magnum opus had he not burned out the general public and gamers on over a dozen editions of Axis and Allies. And if War Room had been published in 2005 and not 2019. It's still kind of fiddly for modern war games, is the problem.
Gotcha.
But you collaborate with allies, you coordinate maneuvers before resolving secret simultaneous orders for movement and production. While in Axis and Allies, one player moves and then another player moves. In War Room, everyone writes down their orders for how their troops are going to move at the same time, and then it's all resolved. Which makes a lot of sense when you think about Fog of War, right?
Absolutely. And it adds a fun element to the game.
But very much like Axis and Allies, you capture enemy capitals in this World War II scenario to secure victory.
So this is Axis and Allies as it should have been for the real World War II wargamer.
Yes.
It's got a large circular map. If you get the upgraded staves for pushing pieces around the upgraded neoprene map, you really will feel like a general or an admiral, a grand master of strategy setting out orders from the Pentagon, or the equivalent military office of whatever power you happen to be planning for. And it is awesome. The map projection is also quite nice in that it minimizes the prominence of the Americas and maximizes the importance of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, Europe, and Asia.
It's too large, Rick. It's expansive, it's colorful, it's wonderful, but it's too in-depth for most gamers.
So you need an addition on the house.
Yeah, an addition on the house. I mean, that's every gamer's dream, right?
Yeah.
You know, not the solarium, but just the game room.
Sure.
I would totally, if I had bought a house with a solarium, I would turn it into a solarium game room. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Fantasy wish fulfillment.
I really just need a cellar with like some dripping water and...
No, it's going to ruin your cardboard. I want a solarium, you know. I mean, I have to worry about cardboard fading, right? But, like, I want to see the daylight as I play my game, have somebody bring me a nice, like, rosemary gin martini. It's going to be a whole thing. Anywho, I kind of think War Room is almost like a love letter, not only to Larry Harris fans, but a love letter to the game of Axis and Allies itself. Mm. War Room has an MSRP of $250. That's for the base game. No upgrades, no staves, no neoprene mats, all available from Nightingale Games. But if you get all those upgrades to feel like that general in the Pentagon or the Kremlin or wherever, you're going to spend an additional $200 to $250.
Oof.
Yeah. Not that you need those things to play the game. The base game is great. But if you can get this game to the table once a month, which is kind of an impossible task, but if you could, it would almost be worth it, especially if you can get a couple of your wargaming friends or gaming friends to chip in $50 each. That might work.
You just might be able to justify it as a one-off event game. But it's going to take you a while to even figure out what you're doing, so you're going to need to have some time to play it.
Yeah, you need to play this a couple times to have any amount of competence, for sure.
Yeah.
I have played War Room only a couple of times, and I want to play it more. But if I only had one day to play a game between War Room and Axis and Allies, it really depends on the group I was playing with. If I were playing with high-level wargamers or World War II buffs who wanted to play a zoomed-out global simulation, I would choose War Room. Mm-hmm. If I were playing with any other group of people, I would choose Axis and Allies.
Because Axis and Allies, you can get people on board who are not already 100% on board.
And I think Axis and Allies takes just as long to play as War Room, maybe more time, but I would definitely choose it. It's less abstracted, the components are nicer for people who want to have something that's less abstracted, because battleships actually look like battleships rather than abstract tokens and things like that. There are more toys in Axis and Allies.
Gotcha.
I think Nightingale Games is coming out with a second edition of War Room. I don't know if it's going to be any different. I know that was their plan several years ago. We'll have to check on that at some point.
We will. But in the meantime, let's check on Memoir 44.
Oh, there's a moldy oldie.
Yeah, it was first released in 2004, designed by Richard Borg.
This is Borg, not Berg.
With an O this time. It's published by Days of Wonder. Memoir 44 is a historical board game. where players face off in stylized battles of some of the most historic battles of World War II, including Omaha Beach, Pegasus Bridge, Operation Cobra, and the Ardennes. The game mechanics, though they are simple, still require strategic card play, timely dice rolling, and an aggressive yet flexible battle plan to achieve victory.
I think Memoir 44 is great for people who enjoy World War II scenarios. It's a great team game in that you can play 1 versus 1, which is not a team game as we've defined it, right? But you can easily add additional people to both sides. So you have 2 on a side, 3 on a side, up to 4 on a side. So it's quite flexible in that way. But the teams are 1 versus 1. So you don't have, the politics and weirdness of having a third team in the game or anything like that. You can have small skirmishes or grand campaigns. And what's cool is that some war games have the goal of just completely wiping out the other player. And Memoir 44 is a simple way to teach newcomers to games about more abstract goals, like victory point based goals, where you just try and get 8 victory points and push the other forces back rather than just taking them all out. Memoir 44 can become quite complex if you want it to be. In its simplest form, you can teach it in 10-15 minutes and you're on your way.
The granularity is really nice to get started at a low level. The problem is it can be easy to add too much and just get lost in the noise, and setting it up can really be annoying.
Oh, there's so many terrain types and subterrain types in certain scenarios, and it can take 15-20 minutes to set up a scenario that only lasts half an hour. But that's fine. You don't have to play those scenarios.
Right.
Memoir 44 is one game in a kind of cluster of games, not a series, but a cluster of games called Commands and Colors. And this is the idea where basically your board, which is a board of hexagons, and you have troops on it, different units like infantry and tanks. And so you have a central area of the board, and then you have your left and your right flank. And then your players, each player has a set of cards that can order troops to move or attack in different types of maneuvers and strategies in each flank of the board. And you can't just move your troops wherever you want to. You have to have a corresponding card for the third of the board where your troops are. And the idea here is that your cards are issuing orders to your troops. So even if you have troops there, if you have no orders for them that come down from on high, you can't order them to do anything. So this is a way of kind of simulating the fog of war. And this is the game mechanic that Richard Borg is so famous for. In line with talking about games that have multiple iterations, there are so many iterations of the Commands and Colors mechanic. There are many expansions for Memoir 44, but the Commands and Colors mechanic is brought to light in the game Ancients, Battlecry, Napoleonics, Samurai Battles, The Great War, Medieval, Red Alert, and some of these games really are distinct, and I think some of them are really just cashing in on the Commands and Colors mechanic. And I understand they're trying to have a game from different periods of history, and that's great, but just giving a set of mechanics a new skin and adding on 1 or 2 bonus mechanics is not really enough. There are other Commands and Colors games too. There are over a dozen for sure. And I think 3 or 4 or 5 Commands and Colors games would have been fine.
Is that the secret theme to this episode? Games with too many additions?
I don't think we've made it a secret. This is supposed to be about teams, right?
Yeah, all these game additions are teaming up on us.
I see what you did there. Yeah.
So
you get 1 per episode, Rick. That was your one. I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, I did.
Let's talk about a game that's war themed, but not a war game.
Yeah, let's try Captain Sonar.
Oh, good pick.
So this is a game that was released in 2016. It's a game in which you and your teammates control a state-of-the-art submarine, and you're trying to locate an enemy submarine and sink it before they can do the same to you.
Players take on the roles of captain, chief mate, radio operator, and the engineer. All members of the team sit on the same side of a table, and the other team is on the opposite side of a table. You're going to want at least a good 6 or 8 foot table for this game. And so each player takes on one of their roles as a crew member of the submarine, and you kind of have a division of labor in the operation of your ship or your boat. Aren't submarines called boats? Anyway, I'm not a Navy man.
Sure.
one player is the captain and kind of issues orders, and the other person manning the sonar will listen to the opposing captain's orders and try and decipher where that sub might be in the water. And then, you've got your munitions room person, which I think is your chief mate, who's preparing torpedoes and mines and other devices that you can combat. And you can either play Captain Sonar in real time or as a turn-based game. And real time is where it actually shines.
Nice. Captain Sonar is an incredible submarine adventure, and it's a way of understanding submarine movies. Is it true to life? Well, no. And I can't really say how true to life it is. I'm not a submariner, nor have I consulted with one about the game.
Not only does the game shine when it's played in real-time mode, it really shines when you have 4 players per side. You can have multiple players take on multiple roles, but then you've got kind of cognitive overload, and the working memory is just taxed enough when you have 4 players per side. Mm-hmm. The problem is, how in the world are you going to get 8 players to the table all at once? And even if you can, there are so many other games that I would rather play if I had access to 8 gamers at the same time. Game players are a very precious commodity. And Captain Sonar is not how I would want to spend my time if I had 7 others with me ready to play games. I'd rather play hardcore 10-player Axis and Allies or 8-player Axis and Allies, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough to get that many people without a schedule conflict at the same time. I did have fun with it playing it in a game store tournament once.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I was our team's radio operator. My team made it to the semifinals. And then we got killed. So fast.
So you were just out of your depth.
I'm out. Quitting the podcast.
Yeah, that's totally fair. That was mine per episode.
So, war games and in-depth strategy games. They're actually great arenas for team-based games because they have so many moving pieces and aspects to their systems. These systems need tending to, and they benefit from more than one pair of eyes, and sometimes they reward intense focus of one player on a specific aspect so that the other players on the same team can be freed up to attend to other matters. And that's really fun, to have differing roles for different people on your team.
I would love to see kind of genre and thematic expansion in team games format. I mean, there are other team games that are not war games, that are not militaristic, that are also not family games like Codenames that we talked about. Mm-hmm. But, because we did subdivide kind of definitionally what team games are. We said they weren't one versus all. We said they weren't semi-cooperative. We said they weren't cooperative. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. And there are tons of games in all of those kind of other subdivisions, where you can play as a member of a team. So I don't want to say that there are, very few opportunities to play a board game on our team. There are actually tons and tons and tons, many of which are fantastic.
Right.
And you can also play a solo game on a team if you want to. Make no mistake about that. Mm-hmm. But as we have defined it, at least 2 human players against at least 2 other human players on 2 different teams or more, that specific opponent structure for a game, I think, is quite limited and would love to see more.
The difficulty with team games, of course, is you need at least 4 people. And they all have to know the game, and they all have to be inclined to play that game at the same time when they're also free.
Yeah.
And just that can be an impossible task. The basic rule of thumb is that the more players a game requires to play, the less table time it's gonna see.
It's true. Additionally, because team games have more brains processing them, which developers know, they tend to make these games more intricate, capitalize on the increased processing power, which leads to longer games. And just, Rick, as you said, the more players you need to play a game, the less table time it's going to get. The longer a game is, and more intricate a game is, the less table time it's going to get.
And you have to get every player to pay the cost and effort and time to get over that increased barrier to entry.
It is absolutely worth it if you're playing the right game with the right group of people. Developers do want their games played by as many people as possible. So with these 2 factors, we've mentioned just the complexity and the number of players. Mm-hmm. Keeping these games off the table. Perhaps developers just stay away from developing these types of games.
But this is really a chicken and the egg problem.
I mean, if we did have more of these games played...
then more would be developed by more developers.
Which would lead to competition and innovation.
Which would lead, hopefully, to better games.
which would lead to more people playing those games.
And we know that all of this sounds like capitalist propaganda.
Let's just not dwell on such minutiae.
Yeah. Speaking of minutia, Pete, you're not going to let us go until we discuss that new game you're excited about, right?
Oh, yes, right. Okay. So, Moonrakers. We've talked about it in the podcast. We have a full, in-depth written review where Rick goes on and on about, like, naming all of the moons in the solar system. I don't know. It's weird.
I had some fun with that one, yeah.
You did, didn't you? We were just sitting talking about the review, and you're just like, there's Callisto, and I'm like, oh my goodness, can we play the game, please?
So many moons to Rick.
So I'll never forget that afternoon. I'm like, what are you doing? Play. Moonrakers, released by, I still don't know if they're called 4 Studios or IV Studios. Roman numeral 4, could be an IV, could be 4 Studios. Released Moonrakers in 2020. It's a space-themed deck building and social negotiation game, which is semi-cooperative. It is not team-based. But on July 19th of 2022, they are launching a Kickstarter campaign known as the Titan Campaign, where they are going to be trying to fund 4 new expansions for Moonrakers, as well as a big box to hold it all in called the Titan Box.
So you might still be able to have room for some other games on your shelf.
It is true. I need to do a purge. I need to give some away, donate some. I don't know. Unless people just want to, subscribe to our, become a Patreon, and then we could afford a Corex and Coffee library offsite. That would be a wonderful gaming library that we could have people come and play. That'd be great. Subscribe to our Patreon, maybe. I don't know. Let's go back to Moonrakers.
So it's got the 4 expansions, yes?
4 expansions. So the first expansion is entitled Binding Ties, which adds some sort of reputation stat to the game, and you can choose a partner on a contract that's another player and earn reputation, and then your reputation is tracked. And while IV Studios is holding the cards very close to the chest at this point about what those mechanics actually are, I am curious to see if this turns the semi-cooperative game into more of a team-based game. That's kind of why I've inserted it into this episode. Also because the Kickstarter is coming up very soon.
So that is neat.
Yeah.
So in the original Moonrakers, you care mostly about what other people at the table think of you and whether they'll bring you along for missions, etc. But with a reputation tracker, you're also concerned with what the wider world thinks of you. And you might want to be consistent about who you actually help out and who you hang out to dry.
And, the other players in the base game of Moonrakers already cared about that, and that was kind of like the social aspect, but now they've added some mechanics maybe in some way. I don't know if that'll work out or not, but I'm really excited about it. I'm going to sign up for this Kickstarter on day 1 once it launches.
Yeah.
The second expansion they're calling Overload, and it does something. It's unclear from the current press release what it might do, but it might have something to do with doubling the abilities of cards. Nomad, being the third expansion they've promised, is going to have new event cards, and the tagline for Nomad is, "Bend the galaxy to your will." Yes, please.
I mean, Pete, they had you at more cards.
That's all it takes. That's absolutely all it takes. I want all the cards. And IV Studios, or 4 Studios, I'll never know. I should email them to ask them, but let's be honest, it's not going to happen. In true teaser and showmanship, is it show personship fashion? Has not yet released the name of the 4th expansion.
Ooh.
Because we're recording this podcast so far ahead of time before we're posting it, there very well may be more information about the Titan campaign by the time we post this, but I'm sure we'll be talking about it again.
Sure.
Go check it out.
Absolutely.
So this has kind of been a podcast where we've been talking about some team games. A lot of them have been militaristic war game type things. We definitely want to see more team games be developed and released as we've defined it. We think that would be a really great thing for the community. We would love to see team games about building a garden, maybe not. I don't know. I don't really want to build gardens, but there are certain people who do.
I'd love to see that same division of labor that you see in some of these fun, complex war games in a different sort of game, in a different setting. To have somebody who, okay, this is your job on team, but it's not about turning the other team into fine, chunky paste.
You know what I want to see is I want to see a 4v4 game of Starfleet battles come out. And now I'm just dating myself. Everyone needs to go to Board Game Geek and check out Starfleet battles, and then we'll all be better for it. Thank you so much for listening to us once again here at the Corax and Coffee Cast. Please do like and subscribe. Check out our website content at www.coraxandcoffee.com.
Please consider supporting us on Patreon or through our merch store.
I'm your host, Pete Steele.
And I'm your other host, Rick Hendricks.
We really do hope to see you at the gaming table soon, and I'd love to be on some of y'all's teams for whatever game that we end up playing.
Absolutely. I'll be on the other team and rip you apart.
Bring it. Bring it. Take care, all.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You can call me a lot of things. Most of them are not allowed on the air, but a team player is rarely one of them. I'm not really a lone wolf either, more an agent of chaos and glitter, wrapped in anarchy, wrapped in a t-shirt. I'm not out to jelly anyone's jam, but I'm also not here to go quietly into that dark night. That said, any game can be a team game if you try hard enough. Though, if your friends start putting their keys in a bowl, I'd say it's time to make like a baby and head out. Anyway, our hosts this week, like every week, Pete Steele and Rick Hendricks. Next week, who knows? Maybe someone named Dylan or Cassandra. Probably not. Semi-coherent rambling and production, as well as music and editing brought to you by me, Keegan King. Thanks to all the supporters and people working so hard behind the scenes. If you'd like to join them, follow us on social media, go to our website, coraxandcoffee.com, join our Patreon, or just subscribe, rate, and review on your podcast listening app area, Apple, Spotify, it's all good. You can also find print and play games, reviews, unboxing videos. It's magical. The quote of the week: "This is it, dudes. My favorite place in the area. Everything I know I learned right here. A frog taught me how to cross the street, and when my house was haunted, I learned how to eat ghosts." Corax and Coffee. Tabletop gaming, caffeinated.